I began as an activist with Moral Monday. I participated in a sit-in around voting rights, and actually from the very beginning, it was actually a friend of mine who was an organizer who kind of pulled me in, and I didn't know at that point that that's what organizers do. They organize people. I didn't even know what an organizer was, and he told me, early on, that you're an organizer, Bree. And I didn't believe him, but now I'm an organizer, so I guess he was correct. And I'm mainly just, it was through the passion, it was through seeing like where there was need and just like looking at my own talents and things that I could lend to the movement. I just slowly moved into becoming an organizer. And I think I was like a whole bunch of people. I had fantasies of taking the flag down if I could. And once the opportunity presented itself and there was a team of people who, had looked at the logistics and they really had a plan for how we could do it, a feasible plan, I was like, absolutely. So. We were in jail for, I think it was probably about 10 hours total. When we first got in there, it was only like within the first, I think about 45 minutes later from our arrest, we had just gotten through like being processed and everything. That was when they told us that the flag had been raised back up. And so I assumed that, maybe it hasn't made much of an impact. But then while we were down there, the guards were occasionally saying things to us like, oh, wow, like, are you guys the ones that took down the flag? And there was actually a lot of support from the guards, from the people who were, held in the jail with us. People kind of giving us the thumbs up, like on the low, because I think that's really how a lot of people felt. A lot of people are just really tired of all the hatred, of all the divisiveness, and so a lot of people really were very supportive. I'm really glad that the legislator did the right thing, but at the same time, I feel like their hand was kind of forced. It was kind of like, okay, we have no other option but to take the flag down. The only problem with that is that if we don't continue to push, it can remain a very symbolic type of victory where it's like the flag's down, but we haven't really addressed like the problems of the ideology that the flag represents. And so I think that we really have to push to actively combat that ideology. We really need to look at, because I think one of the things that has been raised as well is the miseducation that's happening around the history, which I find very frightening and problematic. I think we really need to look at what is being taught in the schools in terms of the history of the Civil War and the Civil Rights Movement, the meanings of these symbols and the history behind them. And so I think we have to really keep pressing to really dismantle systemic racism as I see it. I think sometimes, like especially like when we're talking about institutions like churches and things like that, I think it's very easy to get comfortable. You know what I mean? Because I think sometimes people they don't want to rock the boat. It's hard to like really take a stance that's not popular. A lot of the civil rights issues that we embrace now, like for instance, Martin Luther King is more of a mainstream figure now. Gandhi's an easy thing to stand up and say that you support now. But we're in a new movement era, and we really need people to have the same courage that people had in the 60s to support Martin Luther King, which took courage because he was not a mainstream figure at that point. Do you know what I mean? And so I really think that we have to have courage as Christians. I try to remind people, the apostles, they were persecuted people. They were arrested. They went to jail. I mean, these are not things that are antithetical to preaching the word and to living the word. And I think we kind of have to reach back to some of those early Christian roots and remember things like that and really bring that spirit to the modern era. We have to remember that we are truly all children of God. I mean, do we believe that or do we not believe that? Because if we really do believe that, then we have to live that. And it can't just be something that we preach. It can't just be something that we say, for an hour within a building, one day a week. Actually, when I was climbing down the pole and the police officer was telling me that, what you're doing is wrong, ma'am, this is not the way to do it. And what came to my mind was Isaiah 58, where it's basically the Lord is saying, what is the type of fasting that I have called you for? Is it to just bow your head and cover yourself with ashes and mourn? Or is it to break the yoke of oppression? Like the fasting that we're supposed to be doing in our time of earth it's an active type of life of actively breaking oppression, feeding the hungry, clothing the poor, helping to heal the sick. And I think we've got to remember that we don't lose the spirit with all of our, institution and religiosity. Well, I absolutely believe that justice is a spiritual practice, because I believe that is what aligns with God. I mean, that's the Spirit of God. I believe the Spirit of God is love, is justice. And I think that any system, any practice, any belief that is about oppressing someone or furthering injustice is antithetical to God. I mean, that's frankly how I see it. And so to walk with God is to fight for justice. Everybody, everyone has different callings in life, but I think those of us, if we feel it pressed on our spirit, that's how I felt. It actually was just a couple of years ago that I really first experienced the Holy Spirit, I would say, and it wasn't long after that I felt called to do social justice. And I think for those of us, if you feel it pressed on your spirit, that's your calling, and we just have to have the courage to really come together, especially as true believers, and support each other in that. I think it is a second wave of the civil rights movement. Obviously the movement never ends. I try to make sure people who have been doing work in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, don't get forgotten, because they have continued to do work. But obviously there's a swell that's going on right now for like really pushing for change. But I think it's a little bit different this time. I think one of the things that I see happening differently this time is we're really looking at more sustainable models. So it's not just about reform. It's really about how do we really change and break oppression? How do we really dismantle systems of oppression, not just the overall system, but even in our interactions. I mean, even in our organizing circles. I mean, we're looking at new leadership models. We're looking at within our own circles, patriarchy, other things that were kind of, forms of oppression that kind of plagued the movement in the past. And we're really working to make sure that we dismantle those things, not just in society, but, within ourselves as well. Well, one thing that I definitely draw inspiration from, again, I love to look back at the early Christian church before there were certain rules that were put in place. I mean, women were part of the ministry. Absolutely. Women were preaching. You know what I mean? I don't care what anybody says. I mean, that's the truth. And there's really nothing when you look at the life of Christ that supports the oppression of women or the subjugation of women. And so I think and I know through my life, and I'm sure a lot of other women have experienced through their lives, the Lord calls us just as much as he calls men to be leaders and to be speakers and to be faith workers and light workers. So right now I'm just getting back to work in my community. I'm a community organizer there locally. And of course there are specific things that we're trying to do structurally to change things, for instance, developing more cooperative economics or, building a community garden. But so much of the work, on a much more fundamental level, is really just about living Christ and being a light in the world, in your interactions with people, being a positive force, on a day-to-day basis, encouraging people, ministering to people when they need it, praying for people when they need it. I mean, that's so much of the work really is just about you aligning yourself and walking with Christ and being as much as you can an example of what it means to be Christ-like. This is my first time at Wild Goose. It appears to be a predominantly white Christian gathering, and so the fact that you are centering Black justice, the racial justice, I think that's amazing. I mean, those are the kinds of things that we have to do. And when I say we, I mean just as anyone who's an ally to another movement. So obviously, I'm a Black woman. I'm not an ally to my own movement for Black women, but I'm an ally to trans people. I'm an ally to the LGBT movement. And so I think that recognizing that our struggle is connected to other people's struggle, I think that's the beginning of empathy, and that's where we really have to move in order to really eliminate oppression.